A study has shown that people who play violent video games are less affected by distressing images than non-players. The phenomenon is known as emotion-induced blindness. However, it does not prove that video games cause violent behaviour. Dr. Stephen Most is the lead researcher at the University of New South Wales study, and he joins me now in the studio. Thanks for your time tonight. Just tell us how this study worked exactly to come up with the finding that people who play violent video games are more immune to disturbing images.
Sure. Well, when it comes to what we see around us, it's not just about what our eyes look at. What we see around us has to do with also what our brain does with that information once it's been received by our eyes. And part of that involves our emotional reactions to things around us. Things that we find emotional, and maybe a kick in the gut, capture our attention, and our perception, our visual system can get so focused on that we don't see other things that we look right at, even though we're looking right at them. And that's something that we call emotion-induced blindness. And it turns out that there's a wide variation in people in how much they experience this effect. People who have high anxiety tend to experience it more. People who have low anxiety tend to experience it less. And one thing that we were curious about was, does something as everyday as the differences in how much people play violent video games predict this difference? And this is a study that I conducted with my students and my colleague Kim Curby.
And it doesn't prove it's because of their gaming history, though, does it?
No, it doesn't. It could very well be, for example, that people who already have a low or a high tolerance for emotional images happen to be those who are drawn to violent video games in the first place. And so there's nothing that we can say that's causal about the role of playing video games, but we have established a link.
And how did you determine that? Take us through the methodology.
Sure. So what we did is that we pre-screened 1,000 or so undergraduates in terms of how much time they spend playing video games and how violent those video games are, and then we coded them as being people who play a lot of more than 5 hours a week of highly violent video games, or people who don't play violent video games. And then we let only those people who met those criteria see the study. So they never even knew that when they came into our lab that there was a connection between their video game status and what we were testing them on. The procedure when they came into the lab was they sat down at a computer and they looked at a screen, and on each trial they saw a rapidly flashing presentation of landscape images. All of them are upright, and they're told, in this stream, just look for the one that's rotated 90 degrees clockwise or counterclockwise, and report which way it was rotated. And when there was no emotional picture in there, everyone was really, really good. Even though things are flashing by at a rate of about 10 per second, they were very good. But when you inserted a violent image in there, an image of violence or a disgusting image in there, those who don't play a lot of violent video games were really thrown off. Even though they were looking right at the target when it appeared, the fact that an emotional picture had appeared just beforehand just sort of shocked the system in a way, and they couldn't see the one thing that they were looking for. When it came to the people who had played more than 5 hours a week of violent video games, they had a much weaker effect. So it suggests that there are these predictable individual differences between people.
And there are others who could be put into that category of emotion-induced blindness, let's say emergency service workers, and I'd say even journalists. That's
right. I mean, in this case, we capitalized on the fact that so many people within the population play video games. It's an easy way to take a look at, differences between people and what their everyday experience is. But that doesn't mean that the effect that we found is limited to violent video game players. It might be that first responders who have day in and day out a lot of exposure to traumatic imagery might also show the same effect, where they have a reduced sensitivity to this emotional imagery.
Now, this is separate to the discussion around violent video games causing aggression. Has that link been proven?
That's actually a very controversial subject. Some studies suggest that there is a link. Some studies suggest that there's not a link. But one thing I want to stress, as far as our study goes, is that our study doesn't say anything about that. There's a big difference between how we're going to be impacted by graphic emotional imagery and how we're going to behave outwardly towards other people. That kind of thing is going to be colored by our values and our beliefs about what's appropriate. So we're looking at perceptual processing.
Stephen Most, thank you so much for speaking to us tonight.
Thank you for having me.